Good day. My name is Teresa Fredericks from Growing Businesses Using Project, bringing you another video, this time on project closing, and it's part 2. I'm looking at the contribution of planning to successful project closure. This series is entitled Start with the End in Mind. The philosophy is that much of what you have to do to successfully close a project is done in initiation and planning. So let's look at the agenda. What is planning and things to get right to ensure successful project closure? What happens after normal project closure? Requirements for the 3 ways that projects can normally end. Requirements in planning for project termination, and planning's contribution to project closure. So let's dive into it. The planning process groups consist of those processes that establish the total scope of the effort, define and refine the objectives, and develop the course of action required to attain those objectives. The key output is the development of the project management plan and the project documents used to carry out the project. The plan is a comprehensive document that defines the basis of all project work and how the work will be performed. The project closing process group consists of those processes performed to conclude all activities across all project management process groups to formally complete the project phase or contractual obligations. This is according to the Pembroke Guide. So there are things we have to get right in planning if we have to successfully close. Requirements, and I will return to requirements in this video. They include the conditions or capabilities that are required to be present in a product, service, or result to satisfy an agreement or other formally imposed specification. They also include the quantified and documented needs and expectations of the sponsor, customer, and other persons, stakeholders. In planning and in initiation, you have to identify the people, groups, or organizations that could impact or be impacted by the project. This allows for effective engaging stakeholders in project decisions and execution. What about the scope baseline? This is the approved version of a scope statement, work breakdown structure, and its associated work breakdown structure dictionary, which is used as the basis for comparison. In closing, we have to see what we planned and what has happened. But we also have to take into consideration approved changes, which means we always have to be updating documents. Schedule baseline. The approved version of the schedule model that is used as a basis for comparison to actual results. Did we finish early? Did we finish late? Were there adjustments in the schedule baseline because of changes that were approved and required increases in scope? All these are things that we have to look at in closing. Cost baseline. The approved version of the time phase project budget that is used as a basis for comparison to actual results. Obviously, again, we have to see what updates, approvals took place during the project. Now, very important is the configuration management plan. This describes how the information about the items of the project and which items will be recorded and updated so that the product, service, or result of the project remains consistent and or operative. This is critical because in testing and closing, we want to make sure that the functionalities expected in the product are still there. Performance measurement baseline. An integrated scope schedule cost plan. It looks at, as a matter of fact, the 3 constraints for the project work against which project execution is compared to measure and manage performance. Even if you have a reduction in the amount you were supposed to spend, you cannot determine whether it's good or bad unless you look at what was supposed to be done and in which time, which is why the performance measurement baseline is so important. Management reviews. It identifies the points in the project when the project manager and relevant stakeholders will review the project progress to determine if performance is as expected or if preventive or corrective actions are necessary. These should be timed and there should be proper documentation and follow-up. What about development approach? This describes the product, service, or result development approach, such as predictive, iterative, agile, or hybrid model. We have to choose the proper approach for the project. Exit criteria. Remember, we first saw exit criteria in initiation. What are the conditions to be met in order to close or to cancel the project or phase? You're not just canceling based on what you feel in closing. You cancel it based on what was set up in planning. Project approval requirements, acceptance criteria. What constitutes success? Who decides the project is successful? Who signs off on the project? All of these are critical for closure. Risk and assumptions are so important. I want to take some time on them. Before we go on to assumptions and risk, let's look at requirements. They are business requirements. Requests about how the work should be done. The need to satisfy the business objective. Business processes, the need to adhere to them. Business rules, guiding philosophies, all these have to be taken into consideration, especially when the project is being done by a functional organization. There's quality and standards, test and certification requirements, stakeholders' needs, legal and regulatory, project milestones. These have to be met, and sometimes they're tied to payments. Transition and readiness requirements, solution, the functional and non-functional. All these have to go into the scope. So let's look at risk and assumptions. Whereas assumptions help build a reliable project framework, with assumptions come risk. Therefore, as we plan, we have to realize that identifying these assumptions is vital to planning for potential risks. These risks can affect the project's schedule and budget. Very often as we monitor a project, we do not keep our eye on the assumptions. But sometimes if the assumptions change, there may be the need to change focus in our project. We must ensure as we go through the project cycle that the assumptions are still valid, or we may have to make timely adjustments in the project. Risk and assumptions, what does the research say? Furthermore, Tess, Kloppenberg, and Frolick, 2007, mentioned that proper risk management should be recognized as a critical success factor, as well as one of the potential pitfalls of a project. Tess, Kloppenberg, and Frolick, 2007, present that the majority of risks occurring in IT projects relate to areas concerning poor requirements elicitation, lack of supporting and guiding documentation, and issues related to human resources and staffing. But you note that part of the problem is poor requirements, elicitation, and obviously documentation. In supplementary research conducted by Kumar 2002, there are indications that the most common risks include overlooked requirement specifications, technical uncertainty, and unrealistic budgets and schedule. Hence, you're looking at some of the possible causes of project failure that are discovered in closing when we evaluate the project. The source is closure in IT projects, a never-ending story, the bachelor's thesis in informatics by Emily Krasari and Ida Geranda. Now, I felt it was important to detail what expectation acceptance criteria should look like. For a market research project, which is a research type project, we have to be very clinical, and we have to tailor acceptance criteria in keeping with the project. As we plan, we have to keep our eyes on what happens after normal project closure. It's either the operational regime must now take over, so there should be a key input in planning. The products from this project become inputs into some subsequent project. There should be coordination, communication with the other project in planning. It goes into some larger program. This requires in planning communication across projects, and especially with portfolio manager. But is that really how projects end? No. There's the normal, where everything goes as expected. There's the premature, it's no longer feasible, or there's a need to use resources on higher prioritized business venture. There are failed tests, etc. The perpetual, one that never ends, there's add-on, testing, fixes, and extensions. The failed project did not achieve its objectives, and there's change priority. Project is no longer high priority or is no longer needed. I couldn't go on without touching termination. Project termination is when a project ends regardless of whether it's complete. Planning for such an eventuality requires inclusion in the contract of relevant termination clauses, inclusion in the contract of appropriate dispute resolution clauses. We have to ensure scope of the project is defined with regards to both partial and final deliverables. We have to ensure good system for issues identification and determination is put in place that is supported by a system of continuous reporting. We have to ensure there's a good system of internal and external communication. We have to ensure effective systems for change management, issues management, and supplier relationship management. We have to ensure a system for effective and timely performance reporting. We have to ensure payments are tied to successful completion of deliverables, and acceptance criteria are relevant to the project. So let us look at the 3 ways projects can end. If it ends in operations, you have to involve the operation team in planning. You need to determine the support function to do ongoing maintenance and queries. You have to agree upfront upon deliverables required at handover, what, when, format, and method of transfer. End of job documentation needs to be meaningful and coherent to the owner and/or operations team with respect to user guides or manuals, etc. Determine project activities that would create useful information for the support function. Ensure involvement of the support team throughout the project life cycle, their roles, time commitment, etc. Determine the required skill of the support team and any required training. Determine after project support needed, and where possible, include an existing contract. What about if it goes into another project? Involve the other project team or representative in planning your project with a view to coordinating the planning, especially the schedule of this project with the other project, obtaining an input from the other project in the planning of your project, determining any requirements needed from or for your project, both projects, developing an effective communication and reporting system among the 2 projects to capture and disclose information vital to their success, share project management plan and any project issues, delays, unplanned risks, etc. What about the last one? If the project is an input into a program, in planning there must be a focus on the requirements of the project, its contribution to the overall program goals, its priority, and dependent projects. The program manager must foster clear and effective communication, coordination, and reporting among the projects that are important for the success of the program. This and any requirements of the project must be closely considered in planning. Synchronize deliverables in keeping with the program requirements. Adhere to the established control and early warning systems which should be there. So what is planning's contribution to closeout? It helps answer the following closeout questions. Were project resources adequate for this project? Were people with the right skill sets assigned to the project? Were time estimates reasonable and achievable? Were the risks for the project appropriately identified and assessed before the project started? Were the processes and practices appropriate for this type of project? Should projects of similar size and type use these systems? Why not? Those issues that I told you had to be settled in planning, you have to put in place what is necessary to ensure that they are successful. For instance, when we talk about skill sets, we have to have the right skill sets. When we talk about estimates, we have to ensure that they're reasonable and achievable. Where risk, we have to put proper risk responses in place. If you like my content, give it a thumbs up and please subscribe.